Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Soul and the Body Show.
Okay, so the entire foundation of this book, the whole thing, rests on one single crucial distinction. It argues that to even begin to understand this hidden history, you have to realize we're not just talking about one kind of God, we're talking about two, and they are fundamentally different kinds of beings.
On one hand, you've got the true creator of the universe. Now, this isn't some guy on a throne in the sky. It's an all-encompassing, ever-present force that is creation itself. It can't get jealous or angry or go to war. But then you have the biblical gods, right? Like Yahweh and Jehovah. The book describes them as physical, flawed, and kind of limited beings who are always demanding proof of loyalty and honestly show some very human-like emotions.
This one word you see here, ubiquitous, is basically the key that unlocks the book's entire argument. I mean, think about it. You've heard stories like God asking Abraham for a sacrifice just to prove his loyalty. The author's point is really simple. A truly ubiquitous, all-knowing creator, well, it wouldn't need proof of anything. It would already know what's in your heart.
I am Curt Williams, sage, guru, and a spiritualist, and we will be bringing you another episode of This Extraordinary Experience. I've talked about how I got into spirituality. What I said was I had gone through a bunch of horrifying things, and then I went on a path of enlightenment. My determination at the time was, in one way or another, I was going to figure out how they built those pyramids. I was going to figure it out exactly how they built it. It wasn't going to be no if this and if that. I was going to figure out exactly how, and eventually I did. So, with all this information about pyramids, I decided to share with my audience some of the things that I was watching, what I was paying attention to when I was on this journey and on this quest. And I'm going to stop the video. It started out with a video called The Hidden Secrets of the Pyramids. And that's when everything started really honing in. And then I got further and further into it. But I just want to let my audience see what kind of information I got, because once you understand what the pyramids are and understand who created the pyramids, then you will understand more about life than you will ever know from the Bible, from a biblical standpoint. The pyramids themselves, the way they were, well, I'm just going to let the video tell you, and I'm going to comment on this. And let's get started.
What if everything we know about the pyramids is a lie? Not just incomplete, not just missing pieces, but fundamentally wrong from the beginning? Because the pyramids of Giza, the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, the ancient chambers carved deep into bedrock, may have been standing for thousands of years before the first pharaoh was crowned, before Egyptian writing existed, before Egypt itself was even a memory. Look at the evidence we've ignored. The Sphinx bears scars of rainfall that hasn't touched this desert in 9,000 years. The Great Pyramid encodes mathematical constants no 4th dynasty priest should have known: pi, phi, the exact radius of Earth. Inside its passages, no hieroglyphs, no mummies, no treasures, only silence, precision, and sealed doors leading to chambers we're not allowed to explore. Ancient Egyptian texts themselves admit these monuments were already ancient when their kings found them. So if Khufu didn't build the Great Pyramid, who did? And why has this possibility been buried as deeply as the chambers beneath the sand? Night falls over the Giza Plateau, and the ancient stones begin to glow. The setting sun turns the limestone gold, painting long shadows across the sand. The Sphinx crouches at the edge of the escarpment, its gaze fixed on the eastern horizon, its body half buried, its face scarred by forces that should not exist here. Behind it, the 3 pyramids rise in perfect alignment, their angles sharp against the dimming sky, their presence so monumental that distance itself seems to collapse around them. The last tour buses pull away. Voices fade into the desert wind, and in the stillness that follows, something shifts. The monuments stop being tourist attractions and become what they have always been. Mysteries carved in stone, waiting in silence. For generations, we have been taught a clear story. The pyramids were built by the Egyptians of the 4th dynasty. Around 2580 BCE, Pharaoh Khufu commanded the construction of the Great Pyramid, a tomb to secure his passage into the afterlife. Tens of thousands of workers hauled 2.3 million limestone blocks up ramps, shaping them with copper chisels, assembling them with nothing but human will and royal ambition. His son, Khafre, raised the second pyramid and carved the Sphinx in his own image.
Now, I believed all this at first, and I was trying to figure out how, first of all, when a society of any kind starts to build anything, they first manage to discover or figure out how difficult the thing will be to make and what kind of materials they have to do this. These pyramids were built with objects of stone that had not yet been created, because they had to cut these stones out in bedrock to whatever exacting size that they needed. So it wasn't an existing, like when they build buildings today, they'll make things a certain size and you order them. Well, this was just the opposite. The construction of the pyramids were the opposite of having your material available to you and then creating the building. The pyramid was designed and created before construction. And later on, you're going to find out that it had to be a very advanced computer system to do these calculations, and not just any computer system. We'll get into this as we move along.
The third pyramid followed under Menkaure. Together, they represent the pinnacle of Egyptian engineering, proof of what a unified kingdom could achieve. It is a story of triumph, stone and labor, kings and eternity. Textbooks repeat it, museums display it, and guides recite it daily to travelers who stand amazed beneath the towering monuments. But the desert remembers differently. As twilight settles and the wind moves softly through the ancient stones, doubts rise like shadows. What if this story isn't wrong, but incomplete? What if the Egyptians did not build these structures, but inherited them restoring what was already ancient, claiming what had been standing for thousands of years before their civilization even existed? This question is not born of fantasy. It emerges from anomalies that refuse to fit the official narrative, from evidence that whispers of a past far older, far stranger than anything history has prepared us for. Consider the Sphinx itself. Walk into the enclosure that surrounds it, and you will see walls carved deep into the limestone bedrock. The stone is not smooth. It is not wind-scarred. It bears deep, vertical grooves, the unmistakable signature of water erosion. Heavy, sustained rainfall, the kind that requires centuries to carve rock, the kind that has not fallen on this plateau in nearly 9,000 years. Long before the first Egyptian dynasty, long before writing, long before the Nile settled into its current course, rain fell here, and the Sphinx was already standing. Or consider the Great Pyramid. Inside, there are no hieroglyphs, no inscriptions, no mummies, no funerary goods, no ritual paintings or prayers for the dead. Only granite chambers, acoustically resonant passages, and a massive granite box without a lid. The structure encodes pi, phi, the Earth's polar radius, and the speed of light in stone. Its passages align with stars in ways requiring astronomical precision beyond anything attributed to 4th dynasty Egypt. It is not a tomb. It is something else entirely. And then there are the sealed doors. In 1993, a robotic camera discovered a limestone door with copper.
Well, you see these pictures here, for instance. What happens on this particular planet is there's sort of a realignment of the structure of the planet itself. we'll get into that. It's called precession. Every so many years, deserts turn into watery oases and vice versa. And so these things can be carefully calculated to the year, at least to the decade anyway. There has not been water in Egypt like this in over 12,000 years. And so what we're saying is this. What they're saying is the water erosion coming down vertically, if you look at the Grand Canyon, for instance, you will see horizontal lines. Those horizontal lines represent water levels that have been there and move this way, and then sometimes this way, but when they are vertical lines, that means the water is dripping down. It does not rain in Egypt like that. I mean, it has not rained in Egypt. Egypt used to be a watery paradise 12,000 years ago. This is 8,000 years older than the Bible says the first man was created. That's why I say we need to listen to these archaeologists and the buildings, because it's not just this one. There are buildings like this all over the world. All over the world, there are structures that could not be constructed during this time. Let him continue.
Pins deep inside a narrow shaft. When engineers drilled through it, they found a second door behind it. Radar scans revealed voids beneath the Sphinx and pyramid. Exploration stopped. Access was restricted. The questions remain unanswered. Even the Egyptians themselves left clues. The inventory stela describes Khufu not as the pyramid's builder, but as its restorer. The dream stele shows Thutmose IV excavating the Sphinx from sand in forgotten times, as though it had been buried and reburied across ages. These are not the inscriptions of builders. They are the words of inheritors, of people who found monuments already ancient and tried to preserve them. If this is true, if the pyramids and the Sphinx predate dynastic Egypt by thousands of years, then everything changes. Human history is not a straight line from primitive hunter-gatherers to civilization. It is a cycle. Cultures rise, achieve greatness, and vanish. Knowledge is encoded, forgotten, and rediscovered. The pyramids would not mark the beginning of monumental architecture, but its survival relics from a lost age, preserved through catastrophe, waiting to be understood. The evidence does not live in a single place. It is scattered across disciplines that rarely speak to one another. Geology that reads, rain in stone. Archaeology that uncovers anomalies too precise to explain. Mythology that remembers ages before the flood. Genetics that reveals ghost populations erased from history. Mathematics that encodes Earth's dimensions in monuments supposedly built with copper tools. Piece by piece, these fragments assemble into a shadow narrative, one that asks us to look past the convenient story of kings and tombs and into a past far deeper than we have been taught. Tonight, we begin that journey. We will walk through stone and erosion, through ancient texts and sealed chambers, through mathematics and mythology. We will follow the evidence from Giza to Göbekli Tepe, from the Nile to the stars, from the surface of the plateau to the hidden voids beneath it. Each step will circle back to the same haunting question. What if the Egyptians didn't build the pyramids? The sky darkens. The last light fades from the limestone. In this pause between day and night, the monuments seem to breathe, with the weight of time, not 4,500 years, but perhaps 10,000, perhaps more. The pyramids endure, indifferent to our stories, their stones watching as empires bloom and collapse into dust. And if we listen closely, we can hear the silence. Not as absence, but as presence. An invitation, a question, a memory preserved in geometry and stone. The Sphinx waits, the pyramids loom. Our investigation has only begun. If this investigation into forgotten history resonates with you, Consider subscribing to the channel to join us on future journeys into the mysteries that lie just beyond the edges of accepted knowledge. Dropping a like on the video will help others discover these hidden stories, and your thoughts in the comments become part of the ongoing search for truth. Also, let us know where you are and what time it is in your city right now. I'd love to hear from you. Now, let the evidence speak. Ahead lies the first piece of evidence, the one that cannot be explained away, the one written in water and stone, the geological proof that the Sphinx existed thousands of years before Egypt itself. The morning sun climbs over the plateau, and the Sphinx emerges from shadow. From a distance, it appears timeless, eternal, as though it has always occupied this edge of the desert. But distance conceals truth. To understand what the Sphinx reveals, you must descend into the enclosure that cradles it, the deep rectangular pit carved into the limestone bedrock. The walls that frame the monument, like the sides of an ancient quarry. Step down into that space, and the air grows cooler. The walls rise high on either side, blocking the wind, enclosing you in stone. Run your hand along the surface, and you feel something unexpected. Not the sharp edges of chiseled rock, not the smooth polish of crafted masonry, but deep, irregular grooves, vertical channels, rounded edges, undulating surfaces that ripple like frozen waves. This is not the work of human tools. This is the signature of water. In 1990, Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, stood in this same enclosure and saw what Egyptologists had overlooked for decades. Trained to read stone the way historians read scrolls, Schoch recognized the erosion patterns immediately. The limestone walls surrounding the Sphinx bore the unmistakable marks of prolonged water, weathering deep vertical fissures carved by centuries of rainfall, the kind of erosion that occurs when water flows consistently over rock, cutting downward with patient, relentless force. But there was a problem. A profound, unsettling problem. The Giza Plateau has not experienced rainfall of that intensity for nearly 9,000 years. The climate record is clear. Around 10,000 BCE, as the last ice age ended, North Africa was green. Rivers flowed where sand now stretches to the horizon. Grasslands covered the Sahara. Hippos waded through lakes that no longer exist. Rain fell regularly, heavily, shaping the landscape over millennia. But around 7,000 to 5,000 BCE, the climate shifted, the monsoons retreated. The Sahara began its transformation into desert. By the time the Fourth Dynasty rose to power in 2580 BCE, the Giza Plateau was already arid, already dry, already the desert we recognize today. If the Sphinx enclosure shows evidence of water erosion requiring centuries of rainfall, then the monument must have been carved and exposed to the elements during that earlier, wetter climate. Thousands of years before Khafre. Thousands of years before Egypt itself existed as a unified kingdom. Schoch's findings were not based on speculation. They were rooted in geological comparison, the same methods used to date erosion patterns in canyons, riverbeds, and cliffs around the world. He examined the weathering on the Sphinx body and enclosure walls and compared it to the weathering on nearby structures whose construction dates are firmly established. The Old Kingdom temples, built during the Fourth Dynasty structures, definitively dated to the reign of Khafre and his successors, show completely different erosion patterns. Their limestone surfaces are weathered horizontally, worn smooth by wind and sand, the result of 4,500 years of desert exposure. The edges are sharp where protected, abraded where exposed. This is wind erosion, the slow grinding of airborne particles against stone, the expected wear pattern for monuments standing in an arid climate. But the Sphinx enclosure is different. Its walls show deep, vertical grooves, rounded channels, and wave-like undulations, the clear result of water flowing downward, pooling, and carving the rock over extended periods. Wind does not carve vertically. Sand does not create rounded fissures. Only water, persistent and heavy, can produce this type of erosion. The contrast is undeniable. Stand at the base of the Sphinx and look at the enclosure walls, then walk a few hundred meters to the Valley Temple with its precisely fitted limestone casing. The temple shows 4,500 years of wind damage. The Sphinx enclosure shows something far older. Shock's analysis suggested that the Sphinx body and enclosure were carved sometime between 7,000 and 9,000 BCE, during the period when North Africa still received substantial rainfall. This would place the monument's origin in the pre-pottery Neolithic era, a time when human societies were only beginning to experiment with agriculture, when writing did not exist, when Egypt as a civilization was still millennia from its birth. The implications are staggering. If the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt by 5, 6, or even 7,000 years, then the monument is not the work of Khafre or any pharaoh. It is a relic from a forgotten age, a survivor from a climate and culture entirely different from the one that later claimed it. The Egyptians would have encountered the Sphinx already standing, already ancient, already eroded by rains their own civilization never witnessed. This hypothesis faced immediate resistance. Egyptologists argued that no advanced culture capable of carving such a monument existed in North Africa during the pre-pottery Neolithic. Mainstream archaeology maintains that monumental stone sculpture and large-scale construction emerged only with the rise of complex societies, hierarchies, and centralized states, none of which, according to the accepted timeline, existed before 4000 BCE. But geology does not care about historical consensus. Rock records time with indifferent precision. The erosion patterns exist whether they fit our narratives or not. And there is another detail that deepens the mystery. The Sphinx itself is carved from the living bedrock, its body shaped by removing limestone around it, rather than assembling blocks. The same bedrock forms the enclosure walls. When the monument was created, those walls would have been fresh, sharp, and newly exposed. Over time, weathering would affect both the Sphinx body and the enclosure walls in similar ways, since they are part of the same geological formation exposed at the same moment. What Shoch observed was consistent weathering across both the Sphinx and the enclosure walls, evidence that they weathered together under the same conditions for the same duration. If the Sphinx had been carved in 2500 BCE, the enclosure walls should show 4,500 years of desert erosion, just like the nearby temples. Instead, they show far more extensive water weathering, indicating exposure during a much earlier, wetter climate. The only way to explain this discrepancy is to accept that the Sphinx is older, much older. Critics pointed to later repairs and modifications made by Egyptian dynasties.
See, we're talking about weather erosion, but now, that's not even the exciting part. That is the part that's pretty much the things about these pyramids that people don't know and understand is later on they're going to get into the measurements of the pyramids. Obviously, this particular structure is very heavy. So what they had to do, in fact, by the time I finished my research, I had found out that the same beings that created the pyramid had built up the Egyptian plateau. The plateau was sea level at first, but it literally built up the entire plateau before it started. Life on Earth began around Egypt and Iraq. Between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers was the first gardens in Eden. And I'm not talking about 2, 3, 4,000 years ago. I am talking about hundreds of thousands of years ago. Some of my other episodes, I described how The creator is an information system that uses molecules and a computer, a massive computer system that knows where every molecule is at all times, past, present, and future. Now, as civilizations go, civilizations on Earth are not quite what you think. I've recently heard about a new form of deoxyribonucleic acid, a new kind of DNA. There was a time when DNA was first discovered in modern era. It seemed like it was around the 90s, and they started catching a lot of rapists and people who had done things with their DNA. Well, right about 10 years ago, they were able to look deeper, and they found a new kind of DNA. It was found in women. It was the mitochondrial DNA. With this mitochondrial DNA, you were not only able to find an individual, but you were able to find an individual's relatives. They have a new kind of DNA now. You have to look at this. I believe it's called historical DNA. It goes deeper than the mitochondrial DNA. It doesn't just tell you who you are like normal DNA. It doesn't just tell you about your relatives like mitochondrial DNA. Well, this, in fact, DNA is able to tell what kind of human beings lived before you, going back thousands of years. This is where we are now with science. Thousands of civilizations that no longer exist. A civilization can only live so long, and it seems that the weather conditions change, global warming occurs, and an ice age. It changes everything, and these civilizations get buried. They get buried so deep, and these are not dinosaurs. Dinosaurs leave big prints. Well, these are human beings, and basically human beings break down to a point to where over 1,000 years it's very hard to recognize, fossil records of human beings because they're not dense enough and hard enough to stay in. That's a whole nother. Begin to do research on historical DNA. What we're finding out, the point I'm trying to make is civilizations on this planet go back hundreds of thousands of years, not 10,000, hundreds of thousands. In my book, Adam was created, the beginnings of Adam Mu was created 500,000 years ago. 500, and it took them 100 years to create the one Adam before Eve was ever even considered. These were prototype human beings. Now, the same people that built the pyramids are the same people that created Adam and Eve. The same beings that created people created Adam and Eve and called themselves gods. But they weren't gods. They were just an advanced species. I bring up the pyramids because so advanced was the architecture on these pyramids. Let me tell you something about a pyramid. A pyramid's designer. The pyramid designer had to know things that human beings just began to know. The measurements of the pyramid itself. Number one, when they talk about true north. True north is a measurement where you can look at a particular star in a particular place. And it's only true for a moment. And over the next 26 26,000 years, it moved. True north only occurs every 26,000 years. And that's because of these are other videos you have to look at. You have to look at the one called The Precession of the Equinox. It's a very fascinating video that talks about precession. Precession is how, you can imagine the earth spinning around. Well, it doesn't spin around evenly. It has a wobble to it. So it sort of creates if you were to check out the way it almost forms a figure eight because of the wobble in precession. It has to do with other planets and the sun pulling on different parts of it, but it is a consistent wobble. So this true north only occurs once every 26,000 years. And the way the pyramids are built, it compensates for precession. When they built the pyramid, they had to know the size and weight and height of the planet Earth. The way the pyramid was constructed is, I will come back to you with the actual numbers, but they are absolutely fascinating. If you multiply the height of the pyramid, you'll get, by a certain number, you will get the height of the planet Earth. If you multiply the width of the Great Pyramid, you will get the exact width of the planet Earth. If you weighed the pyramid, multiplied it by that same number, you will get the weight of the planet Earth. What I'm trying to explain, whatever designed the computer system that designed the Great Pyramid, put the calculations in it before the pyramid was built. I want the pyramid to weigh this much because this is how much the earth weighs. I want the pyramid to be this high because this is how high the planet Earth is. I want the pyramid to be pointed this way because this is where Sirius B, where the star is in true north. There were things that had to be calculated before the construction that human beings in our time could not have done. They would have had to make these calculations from outer space. They would have had to look at the planet Earth and measure it. And how do you weigh the planet Earth? Well, I don't know, but they did, because we now know how much the planet weighs by the measurements of the pyramid. So basically what I'm trying to say, this is just an introduction. I'm going to probably do this for more than one session. I might do this for a couple of weeks because there's more information than you could possibly believe. Let me just tell you this. The beings that created the pyramid knew how to enter these numbers into a computer system. And the computer system put the building together because the calculations are too exacting, too precise, and too complicated. And then, like a blueprint, the way they do constructions today, they said, here's your measurements, and now you're going to need this kind of material. And then the blocks were created. And there were no cranes picking up. There are blocks inside of the Great Pyramid that weigh over 100,000 tons. 100 tons. You see, so these things cannot be created randomly. You You don't go out and create this and then put it into a building. The building was designed first. And then, a lot of people think that the pyramid, only has 4 sides, but actually it has 8. Now, if you try to figure out why it has 8, well, because these walls aren't exactly flat. They kind of go in just a little bit. I've been trying to spiritually figure out why they needed to do that. And all I could come up with is because they wanted them to be prettier. Then they want them to be different. They just wanted to put another angle on them just so they could be different than the other pyramids. So anyway, let me continue, because all of this stuff is very fascinating and
or taken by parties who preferred it, remain unseen. What did it truly say? We may never know. What remains are echoes. The phrases "before words" and "before the river knew its place," repeated in letters, journals, and second-hand accounts by scholars who heard of the text but never saw it themselves. These fragments are tantalizing, suggestive, but ultimately unverifiable. We cannot prove the manuscript existed. We cannot prove it was authentic. And we cannot recover what was written on pages that no longer exist. But the story endures, and it asks a question that resonates with everything we have uncovered so far. If there were records proving the pyramids were far older than we have been taught, what would happen to them? Would they be preserved, studied, and integrated into our understanding of history? Or would they be dismissed, suppressed, or destroyed deliberately or conveniently because they threaten a narrative that has been repeated for so long it has become indistinguishable from fact? The Great Pyramid stands silent, holding no inscriptions. The Sphinx is scarred by rains from an age before Egypt. Sealed doors remain unexplored, and a manuscript that might have explained it all was reduced to ash. Memory, it seems, is fragile. Stone endures where parchment burns. And perhaps that is why the builders chose to encode their message, not in words, but in geometry, in alignments, in dimensions that cannot be easily erased. Because they knew that words could be lost, scrolls could burn, but stone, if cut precisely enough, if placed deliberately enough, might survive even when memory itself is destroyed. The lost manuscript is gone, but the pyramids remain, and they still whisper what the text might have said. We are older than you know, older than history, older than words. The fire that consumed the manuscript may have silenced one voice, but the stones continue to speak. If the pyramids are relics of a forgotten age, if the Sphinx bears the scars of a vanished climate, if sealed chambers and lost manuscripts hint at knowledge deliberately hidden, then one question becomes inescapable. Was this phenomenon unique to Egypt, or does the pattern extend beyond the Nile, beyond North Africa, across the ancient world itself? The answer, when you begin to look, is as unsettling as it is undeniable. Giza is not alone. Across continents, scattered through landscapes, separated by oceans and millennia, stand monuments that defy the accepted timeline of human civilization. Structures so old they predate writing, so massive they challenge modern engineering, so precise they suggest knowledge that should not have existed when hunter-gatherers still roamed the earth. These are not tombs. They are not isolated achievements of individual cultures rising independently. They form a pattern, a global signature of advanced construction appearing thousands of years before history claims it should, built by peoples whose names we do not know, whose purposes remain hidden, and whose very existence has been erased from the story we tell ourselves about the origins of civilization. The first and perhaps most revolutionary of these sites stands in southeastern Turkey, on a barren hillside overlooking the Mesopotamian plains. It is called Göbekli Tepe, and until its excavation began in the 1990 seconds, no one believed such a place could exist. Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years old. To put that in perspective, it was already ancient when the first pyramids were supposedly built. It predates Stonehenge by 7,000 years. It predates pottery, metallurgy, and the wheel. It was constructed during the pre-pottery Neolithic, a period when human beings, according to every textbook, were still nomadic hunter-gatherers, living in small bands with no centralized authority, no surplus labor, and no capacity for monumental architecture. And yet, there it stands. The site consists of massive stone circles, each anchored by T-shaped pillars carved from limestone, some weighing over 10 tons. The pillars are covered with intricate carvings, animals, abstract symbols, human figures rendered with skill that rivals much later artistic traditions. The stones were quarried from bedrock, transported uphill, and erected in precise arrangements. The circles were then deliberately buried, one layer atop another, as though the site was meant to be preserved rather than used. But here is what makes Göbekli Tepe so disruptive. It was built before agriculture. The people who carved these pillars had not yet domesticated crops or animals. They had no cities, no kings, no written language. And yet, they organized labor on a scale requiring hundreds of workers, sustained over generations, coordinating quarrying, carving, and construction with an efficiency that suggests not only skill but social complexity far beyond what the timeline allows. If Göbekli Tepe can exist 12,000 years ago, then the assumption that advanced architecture requires settled civilizations, agricultural surplus, and hierarchical states collapses. Something else was happening in the deep past, something we do not yet understand. Travel west, across the Mediterranean, to the mountains of Lebanon, and you encounter another impossibility. At Baalbek, in the foundations of a Roman temple complex, lie 3 stones that defy explanation. They are called the trilithon, and they are the largest work stones ever used in construction anywhere on Earth. Each block weighs between 800 and 1,000 tons. They are precisely cut, fitted together without mortar, and positioned 20 feet above ground level in the temple's foundation. Modern cranes strain to lift 200-ton loads. The blocks at Baalbek are 5 times that weight, moved into place with tolerances measured in millimeters, set so tightly that centuries of earthquakes have not displaced them. The Romans built the temples above the trilithon, but they did not move the stones. Roman engineers left records of their projects, aqueducts, roads, colosseums, but they make no claim to the trilithon. They built on top of it, incorporating the massive foundation into their own work, suggesting they found the stones already in place, relics of an earlier construction whose origins even they did not know. And in the nearby quarry, still attached to bedrock, lies an even larger stone. It weighs an estimated 1,200 tons, partially carved, abandoned mid-extraction, as though the project was interrupted and never resumed. Who began cutting this stone? What technology were they using? And why did they stop? Cross the Atlantic, high into the Andes Mountains of Bolivia, and you find Pumapunku, a site that presents a different kind of impossibility. Here, the mystery is not size, but precision. The stones at Pumapunku are not the largest ever moved, but they are among the most precisely cut. The blocks are made of andesite and diorite, stones harder than granite, resistant to the copper and bronze tools attributed to the Tiwanaku culture that occupied the region. And yet, the stones are cut with machine-like accuracy, flat surfaces polished to near-perfect planes, right angles measured to fractions of a degree, interlocking joints that fit together like puzzle pieces, requiring no mortar, no filler, no adjustment. Some blocks contain channels and grooves carved at precise depths, as though rooted by machinery. Others show drill holes with uniform diameters, the kind produced by rotary tools operating at high speeds. But the Tiwanaku, according to archaeology, had no such tools. They had no iron, no steel, no advanced metallurgy. How, then, were these stones shaped? Skeptics suggest that the precision is overstated, that patient handwork with stone tools could achieve similar results. But when modern stonemasons attempt to replicate Pumapunku's cuts using Bronze Age technology, they cannot match the accuracy. The angles deviate, the surfaces remain uneven, the tolerances fail to meet the ancient standard. Something is missing from our understanding. Either the tools existed and were lost, or the techniques were far more advanced than we assume, or the timeline is wrong, and these stones were cut by a culture possessing knowledge that has since vanished. Travel again, this time to the island of Malta in the Mediterranean. Beneath the surface lies the Hypogeum, a subterranean temple carved directly into the limestone bedrock over 5,000 years ago. The structure descends through 3 levels, encompassing chambers, alcoves, and passages hewn from solid rock with tools that, once again, should not have been capable of such work. But the true mystery of the Hypogeum is not its age or its construction. It is its acoustics. The oracle chamber, a small room deep within the complex, resonates at 110 hertzes, the exact same frequency as the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid. When sound is introduced at this frequency, the chamber amplifies it, creating a resonance so powerful that it vibrates through the stone and into the bodies of those standing inside. This is not accidental. The chamber was designed to resonate. The builders understood acoustic engineering, harmonic frequencies, and the interaction between sound and stone. They carved the space deliberately to produce this effect, shaping the walls, ceiling, and floor to create a resonant cavity tuned to a specific pitch. Why? For ritual, for healing, for altered states of consciousness? We do not know. But the parallel to the Great Pyramid is undeniable. Across thousands of miles and potentially thousands of years, 2 separate cultures built chambers, tuned to the same frequency, using the same principle of resonant architecture. These sites, Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, Pumapunku, the Hypogeum, are not anomalies. They are data points in a pattern, a global pattern of advanced construction, precise engineering, and encoded knowledge, appearing long before the rise of the civilizations we credit with inventing such capabilities. The pattern extends further to the underwater structures off the coast of Japan, submerged since the end of the last ice age, to the megalithic walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where stones weighing hundreds of tons are fitted together without mortar, to the stone spheres of Costa Rica, carved with geometric perfection for purposes unknown, to the dolmens of Korea, the standing stones of Karnak, the temples of Malta. Everywhere, the same signatures appear. Massive stones moved with impossible efficiency, precision cutting requiring advanced tools, astronomical alignments suggesting detailed celestial knowledge, and construction dating to periods far earlier than mainstream history allows. This is not the work of isolated geniuses or fortunate accidents. This is the fingerprint of a lost capability, a knowledge system that once existed across the ancient world and then vanished, leaving behind only the monuments themselves as proof that something greater once was. The implications are staggering. If Göbekli Tepe was built 12,000 years ago, if the Trilithon predates the Romans, if Pumapunku's precision cannot be replicated with Bronze Age tools, then human history is not the steady upward climb we imagine. It is something more complex, more cyclical and silent.
Because if you're dealing with something that would totally conflict with the biblical record, the Bible seems to be the most important document ever created for human beings. And about the creation of mankind, it says, then God stepped out in space and he looked around and he said, I'm lonely, I'll make me a world. As far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything. blacker than 100 midnights down in a cypress swamp. Then the light broke, and the darkness flowed on one side, and the light stood shining on the other. And God took that light into his hands, and he placed the sun up in the heavens. And he took the light that was left from the sun, and he flung it into the darkness, spangling the night with the moon and the stars. And God said, "That's good." Now, by the end of that poem that I had to recite in church from the time I was 5 years old, it gets to the point where God is still lonely, and he kneels down by a lump of clay, toiling like a mammy toiling over a baby, and he shaped it into the form of a human, and to it he blew the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Amen, amen. Now that's a poem by James Weldon Johnson. However, this is the biblical account of the creation of mankind. This here debunks all of that. This says that the pyramids were built by an advanced species was more advanced than we are now. And I'm saying, and everybody, a lot of people are understanding now, that the same beings that created these pyramids are the same beings that created mankind. This conversation gets very complicated, because then you have Lucifer involved, which common sense should tell anybody that an angel cannot fight or think about fighting or have a notion of having a conflict with the creator of the universe. There is nothing to battle. Where are you going to go, devil? Satan, where are you going to go? Are you going to go? How you going to attack the creator of the universe? Lucifer's battle was never with the creator of the universe. It was with the beings who were masquerading as gods, and they were not gods. And that's what and what makes it so bad is not the fact that they created mankind in their own image, which was humanoid, that pissed off Lucifer. What pissed off Lucifer was he tried to make a deal with these beings and said, "Hey, if you guys can be gods, I want to be one too." And Jehovah promised him he would, and at the last minute, Jehovah changed his mind, and that's when Lucifer was pissed. He's like, "If I can't be a god, I'm taking you suckers down." So Lucifer's battle was with the same people who built these pyramids and created mankind in their own image, never the creator of the universe.
To scattered survivors struggling to rebuild from fragments, and they understood that writing, no matter how carefully preserved, is fragile. Scrolls burn, libraries collapse, languages evolve and become unreadable. Within a few centuries, texts become incomprehensible. Within a few millennia, even the script itself is forgotten. But mathematics is universal. The ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter is the same today as it was 10,000 years ago. The same on every continent, in every language, for every culture that develops the concept. The alignment to true north does not change. The encoding of Earth's dimensions remains readable to any civilization advanced enough to measure and calculate. The pyramid is a message that does not rely on the survival of those who sent it. It speaks in proportions, in angles, in alignments, truths that transcend culture and language. And the message is clear. We were here. We knew things you may have forgotten. And we built this to remind you. This is why the pyramid contains no inscriptions, no funerary texts, no ritual objects. It was never meant to serve the dead. It was meant to serve the future. It was built not for the kings of Egypt, but for whoever would come after the catastrophe, whoever would eventually develop the tools and knowledge to measure, analyze, and understand what had been encoded in stone. Perhaps we are those people. Perhaps, after millennia of misunderstanding, after centuries of assuming the pyramid was a tomb because we could not imagine any other purpose, We are finally reaching the level of scientific and technological sophistication required to read the message the builders left behind. The sealed doors, the hidden chambers, the voids beneath the plateau, these are not defenses against grave robbers. They are puzzles, designed to be opened only by those capable of understanding what lies within. The mathematics encoded in the structure is a key, a test of whether the discoverer possesses the knowledge necessary to interpret what comes next. And if this is true, if the pyramid is memory preserved across the millennia, then the pattern extends beyond Giza. Göbekli Tepe, with its deliberate burial, becomes not a sacred site but an archive, sealed and protected for a future generation to uncover. Baalbek's impossible stones become foundations, built to survive earthquakes and erosion for tens of thousands of years. Pumapunku's precision becomes a demonstration of capability, proof that the builders possess technology and knowledge worth remembering. The global megaliths are not isolated achievements. They are nodes in a network, a prehistoric attempt to preserve knowledge in multiple locations, distributed across the world, so that even if one culture forgets, another might remember. Even if one continent is devastated, another might survive. Even if languages die and writing is lost, the stones will remain, carrying their message forward through time. This is the cycle. Civilizations rise, achieve greatness, and then fall, brought down by climate, catastrophe, war, or collapse. The knowledge they accumulated is lost. Their cities crumble. Their names are forgotten. And the survivors, reduced to scattered bands, must begin again from nothing, rebuilding slowly over millennia until they once more reach the threshold of advancement. But if the previous civilization was wise, if they understood the cycle, they would not let everything disappear. They would encode what they knew in the most permanent medium available, stone. They would build monuments designed not to glorify themselves, but to communicate with those who would come after, carrying forward the essential knowledge needed to rebuild, to remember, to avoid repeating the same collapse. The pyramids are that legacy. And we, standing now at our own threshold facing climate change, ecological collapse, the fragility of our interconnected systems should recognize them for what they are, not relics of a primitive past, but warnings and wisdom from a sophisticated culture that understood impermanence, that knew greatness is temporary, and that chose to leave behind something that would endure. Night returns to Giza. The stars emerge, the same stars the shafts once pointed toward, the same sky the builders mapped with such precision. The Sphinx sits in shadow, its rain-carved body a testament to ages we have forgotten. The pyramid rises against the darkness, massive and silent, its stones holding secrets we are only beginning to uncover. And in that silence, if we listen carefully, we can hear what the builders are telling us across the span of millennia. We were like you. We built, we knew, we thrived. And then we fell. But we did not let everything die. We carved memory into stone, so that when you rose again, when you became capable of understanding, you would know you are not the first. Civilization has come before, and it will come again. Remember what we built. Learn from what we encoded. And when your time comes, when your own civilization faces its inevitable twilight, do as we did. Preserve what matters most, not in words that fade, but in stone that endures. Perhaps the pyramids were not built for the past. Perhaps they were built for the future, for the descendants of those who survived, for the cultures that would one day rise from the ashes of what came before. For us, the desert holds its breath, the pyramid waits, and somewhere in its sealed chambers, in its unexplored voids, in the mathematics encoded in its very dimensions, the message continues patient, permanent, and eternal. We are not the first to stand here in wonder, and we will not be the last. The cycle continues, memory endures, and the stones, as they have for thousands of years, keep watch over it.
And we got to give a lot of credit to the people who made this video. I did not. I just got it off the internet and hope I don't get in trouble. So like and subscribe, not to just me, but to them as well. And love everybody, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Right there, right there.
Subscribe and push the like button.